Welcome, everybody. We will go ahead and get started here in about 30 seconds. I now call to order this special meeting of the Anchorage Assembly. It is Tuesday, December 28, 2021. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Ms. Allard.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Constant. I understand Mr. Constant will be a little late this evening. Ms. Zolotel.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia. Ms. Quinn Davidson. Here. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Ms. Elledge, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, thought I was loud enough.
Ms. Zolotel, would you read the land acknowledgement, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing as people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present Indigenous stewardship of the lands we now occupy. It is an actionable statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here in the middle of your holiday festivities. Appreciate you taking the time out to attend or dial in. I just want to note that tonight's agenda for this special meeting does not contain any public hearing items. Essentially, we have a consent agenda followed by an unfinished business on AO 2021-110S, which is Title 28, Elections Code Updates, and we had held 2 public hearings which have been closed. So we'll continue with amendments on that item. And then we also have an emergency ordinance that has been brought forward by the administration. We will hear more about that in a little bit. First, I would ask that we address the laid on the table item. We have one laid on the table item from the administration. This item is supplemental and will not require a vote to be laid on the table. However, I will read it into the record. It is Assembly Memorandum Number AM 842-2021A from the Mayor, subject Amendment Number 2 to Purchase Order PO 2021-002953 with Beans Cafe Incorporated for continued delivery of meals to the Alex and Aviator Hotels non-congregate shelters for the Municipality of Anchorage Health Department, $449,685. So I'm advised that we can either move to incorporate this laid on the table item or move to laid on the table. I think that I can just ask the Vice Chair for a motion to incorporate this laid on the table item to the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Zolotel, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Seeking unanimous consent. Seeing no opposition, this laid on the table item, AM 842-2021A, has been incorporated into the agenda. Ms. Alatel, before we move on to any discussion of the consent agenda, do you want to proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are multiple items in the consent agenda, 4B1 through 4B16, I believe, that involve mass care and services provided to people experiencing homelessness. As we've done in the past, I'd like to run through the conflict questions.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. I will read the questions to determine if Ms. Zalatel has a substantial financial, or private interest in these items that come before the Assembly tonight. Is the financial or private interest a substantial part of the matter under consideration?
No.
Does the financial or private interest vary directly and substantially with the outcome of the official action?
No.
Is the financial or private interest immediate and known or conjectural and dependent on factors beyond the official action?
Dependent on factors beyond the official action.
Is the financial or private interest significant monetarily?
No.
Is the financial or private interest a type which is generally possessed by the public or a large class of persons to which the elected official or household member belongs?
No.
Are there other factors that could be deemed appropriate under the specifics of the disclosure and the nature of the action that should be considered?
None of the items under consideration provide funding directly or indirectly to the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. It is the determination of the chair that you do not have a substantial financial or private interest in the matters before the Assembly tonight. My agenda. Okay, got my agenda here. I just want to let folks who are here know that down here in front there are agendas and packets, I believe, with amendments as well. So it is likely that we will need to consider changing the order of the day. First, though, before we go through the consent agenda, because so many of the items on the consent agenda are related to homelessness, I would ask the municipal manager if she would speak to items 4B1 and 4B16 broadly to address how they do intersect with the emergency ordinance that the administration has put forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For members of the Assembly, the way the administration proposed these funding of many of these items is not all, but just a select group of them, is to utilize the CIP funds, the funds that were set aside previously for the Alaska Club. That is where the CFO has recommended, if that's the way the Assembly is going to go, that they take up item 6A first. And then there's a number of items beyond the two that the chair pointed out. There's a number of items that are utilizing that funding. Items 4B10, 4B8, 4B12, 4B9, 4B1, and 4B15. So if item 6A effectively wasn't going to pass, or the funding source would be changed, the funding source on all of these would also have to change, if that makes sense. I just wanted to point that out to everybody before you start your endeavors this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Demboski. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. A question for the municipal manager. If the funding source in 6A A is changed, do we need to, is it the administration's position that we need to subsequently amend the items you've just indicated? Or will that, because the funds would be appropriated into the account, and so it would still just draw from the same account. Is that a correct understanding?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Zalatel, the CFO is on the line, so I think it'd be best for Mr. Frisk to answer that question. Mr. Frisk?
Thank you. Through the chair, Assemblymember Zalatel. I believe I was having trouble. I was hearing a dog barking in the background, so I believe your question is if you change the initial funding source, will that impact the 4B1, 8, 9, 10, 12, and 15? The way it's designed is if you change the initial funding source and the money flows, it'll flow into the 802 account, which is where all these will draw from. So I think that's the way you pose the question, and the answer is if you do change the initial funding source from the SIP account to a different, as long as you don't change the secondary receiving account, we're good.
Great, thank you. That helps clarify that.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Thank you, Mr. Frisk. And I just want to pause and do a sound check. Mr. Perez-Verdia, are you on? Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, thank you. And if we could note for the record that Mr. Perez-Verdia has joined us. So at this time, we will go ahead and go through the consent agenda to pull any items that members wish to address individually, and then we'll see where that leaves us, and then afterwards, we may take up, entertain a motion to change the order of the day. So I will start with Mr. Weddleton. Any items to pull?
Yes, 4 Bravo 13.
4 Bravo 13. Is that it?
That's all, thanks.
Great, thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Allard, any items?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Mr. Peterson, any items?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No items this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Rivera, any items to pull tonight?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No items.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Ms. Kennedy, any items to pull?
No items to pull tonight. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Zalatel, any items?
4 Bravo 17, please.
4 Bravo 17. Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No items this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Quinn Davidson, any items?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Perez-Verdia, any items to pull?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No items this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. So we have 2 items pulled. 4 Bravo 13 by Mr. Weddleton and 4 Bravo 17 by Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to change the order of the day to take up 4 Bravo 13 and 4 Bravo 17, then item 6A before the remainder of the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Zalatel, seconded by Mr. Peterson. This would allow us to take up the appropriation item that flows through to a number of the items in the consent agenda prior to passing those items because a majority of them were, none of them were pulled actually. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, I think that's a good idea, except that I've got an amendment for 4B13, and I haven't seen that distributed yet. So if we jump straight to that, we'll have to pause. I think we could go to the funding item first.
How about we take up, if it's okay with the chair and the secretary, take up 4 Bravo 17 first and see if the amendment comes for Bravo 13 right after that?
Okay, it should be ready, was emailed.
And Mr. Peterson, are you good with that change? Madam Clerk? Okay. The motion on the floor is to take up item 4B17, 4B13, and then 6A, followed by the remainder of and then a vote on the consent agenda items, and then to take up the last item, 5A. Seeking unanimous consent. Seeing no opposition, the order of the day has been changed. So we now have before us item 4B17, Assembly Memorandum Number AM 850-2021, sole source contract with Jack Gadamus for CAMA tax upgrade project for the Municipality of Anchorage, Office of Information Technology, $76,800, Purchasing Department. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve? Oh,
Second.
sorry, Mr. Weddleton, if you wanted to go ahead with something else.
No.
So a motion to approve is on the floor, made by Ms. Quinn Davidson and seconded by Mr. Peterson. Ms. Zalatel, you pulled this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions about this item. Primarily, I'm surprised to see this item come forward without a request for a waiver because Mr. Gadamus just recently left municipal employment. I was wondering if the administration could address that, please.
Through the chair, you are absolutely correct, Assemblymember Zalatel. We would require a waiver from the for this. Mr. Gadamus's last day, I think, is January 1st or 2nd. Obviously he's leaving city employment. He has subject matter expertise on this particular topic. CAMA is at a critical point, and so we believe he has very critical information to be able to help this project be successful. So we would be requesting the Assembly grant him that waiver.
May I follow up? Thank you. Would there be any issues with a postponement to the first meeting in January so the waiver could be brought forward?
No, that would be fine.
Okay. We don't have our new calendars up. As soon as I find that date, I'm going to make that motion.
January 11th.
Thank you. I move to postpone this item to the meeting of January 11th.
Second.
A motion to postpone this item to the meeting of January 11th has been made by Ms. Zalatel and seconded by Mr. Peterson. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair, I'm having a hard time getting into the queue using the system. May I go ahead?
Go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
I just wanted to make sure, since Ms. Demboski said that he was leaving Muni service the 1st or 2nd, that this wouldn't pose, I know you said it was okay, but I just wanted to confirm it's okay that he then wouldn't be able to work until after the 11th? Yeah.
That'll be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a follow-up question from Ms. Quinn Davidson's question for the municipal manager. And given the time frame, and I don't know cost-wise what is the better arrangement in terms of a contract or continued employment, but is it possible to let Mr. Gadamus work remotely for a period of time?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I think we'll have to ask legal. Specifically, Mr. Gadamus is moving out of state. And so that's why he's leaving municipal service, is because he's moving out of state. But we do recognize, obviously, I think everybody recognizes the camera project and the value he brings to making sure that project is successful. But it really is a legal question as to whether he can be a contractor before he gets that waiver. I would suspect the answer is no. And that's why I think it's probably safest just to delay. But I think Mr. Burke or maybe somebody from the Department of Law is online. I know I spoke to Mr. Burke earlier, and he said he may be a few minutes late, but I think he's online. So,
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. And actually, yes, I received a text from Mr. Burke, and I understand that Ms. Ennis is on the line. Ms. Ennis? Or Mr.
This
Burke?
is Blair Christensen. Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm sorry, though. Who is that?
This is Blair Christensen.
Oh, Ms. Christensen. Hi, yes, can hear you.
I think we're having problems with the bridge line because Deanna was just trying to speak and you guys could not hear her.
Okay, thank you.
But I would say, I believe what Deanna was going to tell you is that we do not need a waiver because the waiver under the ethics code is required when he's going to be working for one of our contractors, but because he's working directly for us, I believe we don't need a waiver.
So just to confirm, Ms. Christensen, you said that you do not believe a waiver is required?
I believe that's correct. Dee is on the phone, but I think that because of the bridge line, you guys aren't able to hear her right now.
Okay, one moment.
Yeah. And this is Patrick Burke. If you guys can hear me, I can hear Dee, but obviously she's not coming through the speakers in the assembly room.
Patrick, can we simply confirm a waiver is not needed?
We can hear you now, Dee.
Oh, good. May I speak?
We can hear you, Dee.
Okay. A waiver is not required if the municipality is the contractor directly with the vendor.
Thank you, Ms. Ennis. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, maybe that solves it. I was thinking we could just do an amendment saying that we waive that section of code in this case, but it sounds like we don't have to bother. That's even easier. Thanks.
So we have a motion to postpone this item to January 11th on the floor. Is there any further discussion on the motion to postpone?
Be in there. Hey. There.
Mr. Weddleton?
Well, can we supersede that with a motion to approve?
So there is a motion to approve on the floor, which has been superseded by the motion to postpone to a date certain. And I believe that we can either, and I see Ms. Zalatel's in the queue, vote on the motion to postpone or possibly withdraw it. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. After receiving the advice from Ethics Council that a waiver is not required, I withdraw the motion to postpone if the second agrees.
Yeah, withdraw second.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. The motion to postpone to January 11th has been withdrawn with concurrence from the seconder. So we now have the main motion to approve item AM 850-2021. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote.
To approve it.
Mr. Rivera?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the motion that we are voting on?
I didn't hear your vote, but I can hear you now, Mr. Rivera. How would you like to vote?
Actually, I heard Mr. Rivera ask for a restate of the motion. The motion is to approve AM 850-2021, item 4B, Bravo 17.
Thank you. I vote yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
The motion passes 10-0. Next, we have before us item 4B13, Assembly Memorandum Number AM 846-2021, Amendment Number 1 to Purchase Order PO 2021-003507 with Sockeye Inn to provide hotel rooms at the non-congregate shelter for the municipality of Anchorage. Anchorage Health Department, $66,000, Purchasing Department. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Weddleton and seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, I've got an amendment to this that would the funding stream a bit so that it would be able to fund 50 beds during January. And so check with Mr. Gates. Do you have the amendment version B?
Gates?
Thank you. Yes, I received amendment requests. I have the documents. I don't have them finalized. I apologize. It's been a little bit of a scramble today, but it would be very helpful if this item is changed in the order of the day to occur after 5A.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. So it sounds like we will need to come back to this item to take up Mr. Weddleton's amendment. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to take up change the order of the day to take up item 5A next, then 6A, and then the remainder of the consent agenda, and then item 4 Bravo 13.
Second.
So a motion to change the order of the day has been made by Ms. Zalatel and seconded by Mr. Peterson. Anything further, Ms. Zalatel?
Just that it'll give Mr. Gates an opportunity to finish this amendment on that item, as well as I believe we have another member joining us a little bit later, so it should take care of the outstanding administrative needs. Thank you.
And to repeat the order that you are proposing, if you would.
Sure, Madam Chair. To take up now item 5A, then item 6A, the consent agenda, less the remaining pulled item, and then item 4B13.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. So that would be to take up item 5A, 6A, the consent agenda, minus the pulled items, and then 4B13. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeking unanimous consent. Seeing no opposition, the order of the day has been changed. And again, to take up item 5A next, followed by 6A, the consent agenda minus pulled items, and then 4B13. We now have before us item 5A, ordinance number AO 2021-110S, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending Anchorage Municipal Code Title 28 Elections to update and clarify provisions of the code. So an amendment or a motion to approve is on the floor, as well as a motion to approve amendment number 15 revised. That was moved by Mr. Weddleton and seconded by Ms. Allard. And where we left off, I believe, was with the discussion of your revised amendment. Mr. Weddleton, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd actually like to withdraw that amendment and substitute a revision of that one. And you should have that in your packet. It'll say 15A. So, and to the chair, so if it's inappropriate for me to I could move that 15A now, or if you want to, I don't know, there's other amendments I think that are.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. And just to confirm, Ms. Allard, you, as the seconder of 15A revised from last week, you're good with withdrawing that amendment?
Yeah, that's fine, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. So yes, go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
I move amendment 15A.
Oh, second.
Should have it. Second, thank you.
Amendment 15A has been moved by Mr. Weddleton, seconded by Ms. Allard. Go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
All right, thank you. So this reorganizes it a little bit different than what we were looking at with the previous withdrawn amendment. The intent is not to, there's no desire to change the intent of what's in there. It's just the existing wording is clunky, and I think it's legacy wording from before even vote by mail, and that it didn't quite fit very well. So in this case, it breaks down the section there was a section, part 2, that was deleted in its entirety just to make it read easier. And it talks about the number of observers at designated return locations, which is the election center. So it's not referring to polling stations or to vote centers, but only to the election center. And in this case, it says that any candidate, organization, or group would have at least one observer with a maximum of 4, which is status quo. Then it states in Part B that if it's possible to allow more than one observer, then those would be split evenly, the extras over that split evenly between any candidate or organization. And then C states what is also status quo, and that is the policy of the city, municipality, to accommodate the highest number of observers allowed under these rules, which is 4. So it really says, we really says in the current code prior to, it was never changed in this document, the proposal ordinance, that you get 1 and we'll do up to 4. This maintains that but makes clear that 4 is really the policy, and that's what we strive for. Worked with this with Mr. Gates and also with the elections team, and they support this.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. And Madam Clerk, I have received a request from members who are dialed in if the amendments could be resent via email. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Madam. I would like to make an amendment to this amendment, and I don't believe I have anything yet prepared, so I'll just wing it at this point. It was actually part of a previous amendment that we didn't move, but the best way to handle it might be right here with this one and kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So anyway, I move that we actually amend the amendment to include the phrase in conjunction with legal counsel, and that would be placed in section 2C, the second sentence where it starts out the municipal clerk, so that it would say the municipal clerk in conjunction with legal counsel may restrict the total number of observers.
Second.
So a motion to amend the amendment has been made by Ms. Kennedy and seconded by Ms. Allard. The amendment, and let me make sure I have it correctly here, Ms. Kennedy would insert the phrase in conjunction with legal counsel in front of the start of the second sentence on 2C. So it would read, in conjunction with legal counsel, the municipal clerk may restrict the total number of observers, and so on. Is that correct?
You transposed a little bit of that, but that works, so I would accept that language as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Weddleton? Actually, I'm sorry, one moment, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Kennedy, did you want to speak further to your amendment to the amendment?
Yes, thank you. I would like to. We had thrown around a bit of the concept that a municipal clerk is making a lot of decisions on his or her own, and this would basically provide not only some protections for the municipal clerk in making these kinds of decisions to restrict numbers of observers, but it would also help reassure the public that it's not just one person making this decision, and this would give the municipal clerk some backup, if you will, kind of some legal reason to be making these kinds of decisions, and would just have another set of eyes, if you will, on the situation, whatever the extraordinary circumstance might be, so that it would help to keep that extraordinary circumstance from something being so subjective, but to have another person helping to make that decision would just help lend itself towards a wiser, better decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Weddleton?
Yeah, I appreciate this, and I've actually given some thought on this prior to putting this together, and the place where I stumbled on it is some of these decisions may have to be made for a brief instance that crops up all of a sudden. And, an example this year was with, there's a fire alarm. Okay, what do you do? Everybody's got to go. There's a fire alarm. You don't really have time to check with anyone. Everybody gets kicked out. You're hanging around outside, 2 or 3 minutes later, a bunch of fire trucks come, and who gets to go in with them? Well, you're going to let everybody go in? That probably wouldn't work very well for the fire department. It may not be safe. So, the scenario would be a clerk has to make a really quick decision. And if it were, well, let's wait and check with an attorney. Yeah, well, the fire department wants to get in there, see if it's on fire, but we're waiting for an attorney. It just, that delay would be a problem. So, I appreciate I think it is important to have a way to double check these things, but I just don't think it could, it fits with the reality that is something that has happened. So I guess that's my statement. I wonder if I could ask Mr. Gates or Mr. Burke, what is the routine to challenge the clerk's ruling? So should the clerk say, we don't have room for 4, everybody gets 3, and someone challenges that, what would be the routine for that?
Mr. Gates? Or Mr. Burke? Or both?
See. Well, I don't think that there's any clear established routine for a decision like that one. I mean, there's a whole bunch of administrative decisions made in terms of conducting and supervising the elections, and as well as many other municipal functions like animal control, police work, and not every decision is an appealable decision or contestable decision. I think this falls in that category. However, if a party, a candidate, or a group, an organized group for a yes or no campaign and so forth, that feels it's entitled to observers, so that there should be more observers, so that they were prejudiced as a result of a decision about the number of observers allowed in. This may be one of the arguments they use for their grounds for an election contest, and election contests are based on limited grounds for, I would need to look it up to get it correct exactly, but fraud or malconduct, or misconduct in doing the election. So that might be one of the things they bring up. But election season moves very fast and quickly, and having a contest process for how many observers are allowed into the election center, for example, on Wednesday night, and have that be subject to an appeal process, that wouldn't be helpful for anybody at all. In my opinion. But I think the code's pretty clear. The number of observers is allocated fairly among all candidates that register observers, or groups that register observers. So the clerk's decisions are constrained by what we put in here in the language. So if this is fair, then the clerk's decision that, we don't have a space for 4 per candidate, we have a space for 3, we have space for 2. It's not being really disproportionate or unfair to anybody, and it complies with the rules that you're going to codify on that subject. But I don't think that's, in itself an appealable or contestable decision. But it might be part of someone's grounds that they might state for an election contest.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Weddleton, any follow-up?
Yeah, to Ms. Jones, suppose this amendment were passed, and then is there a scenario where, there would always be some attorney assigned to review a decision fairly quickly? Is it possible to do that? We say, okay, it's election season, we're in there counting, so for the next 2 weeks or whatever it would be, I think it would be on the, city attorney to make sure that there's always someone on call. And I believe we do have attorneys on call routinely. Would that work?
No, Mr. Weddleton, there are no attorneys on call for the elections team. We have Mr. Gates, but I think we all understand the limitations of one attorney for all of you and the clerk's office and the ombudsman's office. So that can be difficult. I will tell you that Mr. Gates responds as quickly as possible as he possibly can. So that is very good for us. But I think your other statement is correct, that it is sometimes difficult to make these decisions. However, we are always considering, I think the one thing that I will say that my legacy probably with the entire clerk's office is when they ask me questions, well, the code says this, and I said, yes, but due process requires notice and an opportunity to be heard. And I usually don't even have to say that because they all know that answer. And there are also equal protection provisions that cover all provisions of the code. And your amendment, as Mr. Gates said, demonstrates equal protection in that the number of observers is going to be equal across all of the groups. If they have to be reduced, it'll be equal. That's an equal protection issue. So we're, to some degree, guaranteeing equal protection in the amendment that you have provided. So I think it's difficult, is what I would say. And I think that you are correct. There were no attorneys available during the fire drill this year. There were lots of observers, and we consulted with the observer groups, and the observer groups agreed to what we decided to do. They each got to pick someone to come in. And then the last thing that I'll say, Mr. Gates did point out the grounds for election contest and said that this could be considered the type of malconduct. And the code actually says that it's malconduct, fraud, or corruption on the part of an election official sufficient to change the result of the election. So this decision probably would not rise to the level of conduct that would result in a change to the results of the election. So it might not, I think we could double check with Mr. Gates, but it might not rise to that level of being grounds, the basis for an election contest.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. So I will continue through the queue. On the amendment to the amendment, we have Ms. Allard, followed by Mr. Rivera, then Ms. Kennedy, and then back to Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I haven't heard of any really good reasons to have anybody as an observer removed. And the other thing I would like to bring up is that we did have Mr. Willer on contract during the election process at the time, if I'm not mistaken. That's correct, Ms. Jones. And we do have Bill Falsey on contract as well, along with Mr. Gates. So it wouldn't be hard to have the people that are on contract, the attorneys, to be on call during that period as well. And this, for me, isn't about the current clerk. It's about the clerk's position and to protect any clerk in that position for future. It's a protection. It's absolutely a protection for that clerk. To make sure that everything that that clerk is doing is on the up and up to protect them for anything that could come forward, lawsuits or challenging elections or the votes or the counts. But when Mr. Weddleton had mentioned in regards to the fire, I don't see how a fire alarm needs a lawyer to be called for people to be removed for safety purposes and then brought back in, because they all were brought back in. So I would encourage people to vote. This is a protection of the clerk's position, not specific to any one person. But as long as we had Mr. Wheeler, we have now Mr. Falsey on contract, we do have Mr. Gates, it's not that difficult to say, okay, during the elections process, this particular attorney will be on call at all times. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. And there is quite a bit of feedback being picked up online, so if folks could please remember to mute. We will go on now to Mr. Rivera, then Ms. Kennedy, and then back to Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, before I go into my question, can you please repeat this amendment to the amendment? I just want to make sure I have the wording correct.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rivera. This amendment to the amendment applies to Section 2C, the second sentence, and would read, the municipal clerk would insert, quote, in conjunction with legal counsel, end quote, may restrict the total number, etc.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So then I guess I have a question for the sponsor and then a quick statement. So did the sponsor have a definition of either the term conjunction or legal counsel? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The wording could be changed if it needed to be, but it was just the concept that the municipal clerk would want to consult with legal counsel in order to justify and have the protections of the decision being made to reduce the number of observers. So it would be, the process itself could be as simple as a phone call. It could be a conversation standing there in the election center. So it doesn't have to be anything scripted. We're not going to request the corps to make a decision. It's just the idea that legal counsel would be there, and that could be anybody that is working the election process. Ms. Allard mentioned that Dennis Wheeler was pretty involved with most of the process the last spring election. We certainly have a very large legal staff in the Muni. So that could the legal counsel could be designated beforehand, and that would probably be wise to do. So, obviously the details would have to be worked out, but the basic concept of there just being a second person to help make that decision, and that person being an attorney with legal expertise and familiarity with the Muni Code and with the election codes would probably be the best person to tap for that responsibility. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick comment. I appreciate the response from Ms. Kennedy, but I think I have to agree with Mr. Weddleton and just add that, I think this amendment just adds too much ambiguity, and frankly, I just don't see how this amendment improves the election process. So I will be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to maybe change Mr. Rivera's mind and maybe Mr. Weddleton's. First of all, I want everybody to recognize or just remember that this is about extraordinary circumstances. It's not about emergencies. And I think we all know that in an emergency, we want everybody out of the building or to be addressed in some kind of safety matter. We're not going to start picking and choosing how many observers are going to have to observe the emergency, if you will. So again, this goes back to that term extraordinary circumstances that I think is the crux of this whole issue. And that is because it is potentially such a subjective thing, that I think that's exactly why you want another set of eyes and ears and just somebody else there to really try to work through the pros and cons of the situation, if you will, so that the wisest decision about whether or not you're going to add or subtract observers is made. So again, this is a protective level that really allows good advice and good counsel to come together in this extraordinary circumstance, whatever that might be. But again, it is not an emergency situation because we certainly want safety to come first. But this would be in that rare occasion where there's just kind of some unforeseen thing going on. There's a potential for constraints that are needed. And so to have somebody else there to help really work through that question would actually be a benefit to not only the observers there, but again, it also goes to the point of improving trust. That's what we're really trying to do here, is improve public trust in the process, and we want to decrease any grounds for challenges or public scrutiny that would cast any kind of negative dispersions on any part of the process. So again, this would actually be helpful. And I don't believe it adds any additional issues with or problems with how to actually, that would actually impact the process. If anything, again, it provides another layer of protection for a lot of people involved. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. I'm trying to figure out a way to go along with this. I mean, I think there is to it, and I wonder, a couple points. One, in this last sentence, when it refers to extraordinary circumstances, that I do consider emergencies. It's like when the fire alarm went off. That's an emergency. You got to do something. It turned out it wasn't a fire, which is lucky, but we would put that in emergency. So that last sentence would be emergencies. And I wonder, I don't know, I can't amend the amendment, right? Okay, so should this pass, and I'd like to hear from the sponsor of this amendment, recommend adding to the end of the last sentence, the third sentence. So it'd say limited to extraordinary circumstances where consultation with legal counsel is not required. And that's an emergency, has to be acted on now. But this second sentence where there's maybe a broader policy, okay, we have a lot of observers coming, a huge amount of interest, there's an occupancy limit on the building, we can only handle X number. And in that case, you can call the attorney and say, look, building code says X amount, I got too many. It seems like there would be time to consult and then make the change. And maybe even prior, sit down with the attorney and say, okay, what are our parameters here? We have X number of candidates. If, you could set out prior what the limits would be. So anyway, so should this pass, I will recommend that further amendment to I think it'll make it work better. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been listening to the debate on the amendment, and I think it stems from a presumption that the clerk can't contact counsel whenever it's needed, and the clerk absolutely can and has been known to. And so I think making it prescriptive doesn't make any sense in the context of what actually happens, which is that the clerk has full access to numerous attorneys and knows when to contact counsel. It feels like we get hung up on the mechanics of it if it's in this. I can see where Mr. Weddleton's point is. It's like some instances you obviously want to consult with counsel well in advance to make sure you're really clear, building code capacities, et cetera. In an emergency, obviously you're reacting to the emergency, but maybe before you go back in the room, you do give counsel a call. But it needs to be fluid and dynamic, those situations, and the clerk is fully within her power to contact counsel, and I'm assured that if she believes she needs legal advice on how to proceed in an instance, she'll do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. And I want to note for the record, too, that we were joined by Mr. Constant at about 4:45 p.m. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment, which would insert, quote, in conjunction with legal counsel in section 2C, sentence 2 after the municipal clerk.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
No.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
No.
The amendment to the amendment fails 3-8. We are now back to the main motion on amendment number 15A. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on Weddleton Amendment number 15A.
Mr. Rivera?
Madam Chair, Mr. Constant here. Could you please just briefly read the amendment?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Constant. So this amendment, actually, Mr. Weddleton, you want to summarize your amendment?
Sure. Mr. Constant, this email to you, but it takes on section 6, page 5 and 6, kind of at the starts at the very bottom of 5. That section 2 deletes all of that and replaces it with new wording that does not change the impact of the old wording. It's just that old wording was unclear. So it says that the starting point is everyone gets one observer. But if the constraints allow more than one, then every group will get an equal number. And then a Part C says it's the policy of the municipality to always go to the maximum, which would be 4. And that any reduction in that amount would only be on good cause. And that if it ever goes below 1 per candidate, organization, or group, then it would be only in extraordinary circumstances. And that's where you heard our discussion on the fire alarm and so on.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Members may proceed to vote on Weddleton Amendment number 15A.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
The amendment passes 11-0.
That's a good one.
Next, we have LaFrance Amendment number 17. Mr. Peterson?
Move LaFrance Amendment number 17.
Second.
Amendment number 17 moved by Mr. Peterson, seconded by Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Peterson, do you want me to speak to this amendment? Or
Sure, go ahead.
if I may be recognized?
Please go ahead, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this amendment further adds the requirement to provide video streaming to the code, and this is an ongoing conversation that I have had with the clerk's elections team, specifically Ms. Jones, and last Tuesday we had added a whereas, and there had been some discussion, not on the floor, but outside of the meeting with the clerk's office of even having a resolution. And then after more floor discussion, this amendment here provides further direction and clarification without needing to go through a resolution. And it requires the live streaming, the 24/7 during election processing. The requirement is being added to the code to demonstrate the intent to use the best technology and all tools available to support meeting the MOA elections team vision of openness and transparency in all elections, to demonstrate the vision of openness and transparency in municipal elections, and to use the best technology and tools available, where those tools allow live streaming of election processes 24/7, understanding that there may be a limit for the length of time for a single streaming session, and it is expected that the MOA Election Center will be live streamed 24/7 during any election processes. And I want to also stress that there are 9 security cameras, and there is coverage that is 24/7 and has been. It's just the streaming piece that we talked about last time with some limitations that we want to make sure can be addressed to comply with this here. And I would ask Ms. Jones, as we have been having this ongoing conversation, if you could add anything to, how we ended up from the whereas to here.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I think that there was some concern that we're live streaming our security video stream, but we're doing it from 8 to 5, so I think we're going to just do it from 8 to 5 and 5 to 8, and I think that's fine. I think it provides the transparency that the public is looking for, and I understand that you were looking for that too. And we have many other security measures in place, and I think in consultation with the team, we don't believe this will jeopardize those other security measures, so we are supportive of this.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, I got it. I was confused on the section numbers, and I got it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Seeing no other members, actually, Mr. Perez-Verdia, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd just like some explanation to the last line that says failure to satisfy the requirements of this section shall not create an independent cause of action. Can I get an explanation as to what that actually means?
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Mr. Gates, would you address Mr. Perez-Verdia's question concerning the last line in the amendment? Failure to satisfy the requirements of the section shall not create an independent cause of action?
A cause of action is another phrase for a lawsuit, and that last phrase just means someone can't sue in district court, for example, Mr. Clerk, because the video surveillance wasn't live streaming 24/7, 23 hours, or 7 days. You missed an hour for technical difficulties or equipment failure or for whatever reason. It doesn't mean you can go to court and sue the clerk. That's all that means.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you read the amendment back? Which number are we on? I apologize.
We are on LaFrance Amendment number 17.
I think I want to, I'd like to amend the amendment. And I would like it to read, trying to figure out the spot we want to enclose it, that perhaps the setup, we can leave out the word, I'm thinking out loud for just a moment, Madam Clerk, that we should be streaming, recording locally from the time the ballots are mailed out until the conclusion of the public session on, is that in there already, John? Let me see, does return looking. From the start of the ballots being mailed out until the end of the election. Say that again. Madam Clerk, can you clarify your definition of election process? Maybe that can be a little bit more clarifying, and then I wouldn't have to amend.
To me? Okay, and actually, so the question is, could we get a clarification of election processes?
The time frame that you're looking at.
The time frame on this?
Yes, Madam Clerk, or Madam Chair. Please, sorry, I promoted you. No, I'm just kidding.
That's a compliment.
Just kidding.
Ms. Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Allard, the proposed amendment did try to define ballot election processes and what that is in that clause beginning with the comma, including from the delivery of unmarked ballot stock until 9 days after the certification of the election or election recount results. So you brought it up, Ms. Allard, when you said from the mailing of the ballots. Well, the ballots can't be mailed until there's ballot stock. So the ballot stock is the first step. I mean, we're preparing for candidate filings. People can come in now and pick up those forms, but there's no ballots. So that's what we mean by election processing. So there's no ballots, and there may be envelope stock down there, but we don't care about envelope stock. We care about ballots. So basically, we're telling you it's from the very beginning until the end. And the end, we picked the 9 days after certification. I think that's when you can file an election contest, is at 9 days after certification. And so we're giving someone until then, and then basically the election is over. So then we're going to stop videoing when the processing is over, because certification and a potential election contest, the timeline is the 9 days after certification.
Madam Chair, I just have a question. So when we do the before we do the certification, from the time the ballots come in, if they all come in and a candidate says, I don't agree with what's going on, they have 30 days, correct? And then we go through certification, and then it's 9 days after. Unless some lawsuit or something forms, then we hold on to the evidence, per se.
Can you ask me that one more time, please, Ms. Allard, so I make sure I understand that?
When all the ballots come in, and a candidate would come in and say, I object, I want to recount. It's 9 days, they have 30 days to do that, or is that 30 days holding after they objected?
No, Ms. Allard, I think that the rules for a recount are following assembly certification, and there are a couple of mandatory recounts, but the deadline is much shorter for a recount. I believe it's like 7 days. And remember, the recount is mandatory if it's really close. It's mandatory. The clerk can order a recount, as we did this year, in the interest of educating the public about the process. And then a candidate can pay for a recount. But that deadline is 7 days. And a recount is different than an election contest. However, the assembly still has to certify the recount. So now we've had a recount within 7 days of certification. So Mr. Gates included language here that says we're still videoing during a recount. So you certified, they filed for a recount, so filming keeps going now. Then we finish the recount, we come back for certification, we're still filming, and then 9 days after certification of the recount, we would stop because that process has ended.
And then, Madam Chair, if I can, Ms. Jones, we hold on to the ballots for up to 30 days, correct? After everything's said and done? Do we hold on to those ballots after videoing is also off?
Yes, the retention schedule, and I think the code also has provisions that we retain the ballots and the envelopes 30 days after certification. So in both of your examples, we would be keeping those ballot envelopes. But there's some practicality to that as well, that we need to schedule what we call shred day. And shred day is typically not scheduled on day 30 because it's difficult to get them to the election center.
Thank you. Madam Chair, can I just, Ms. Jones, my concern is when we have our ballots stored there, that we can have them stored up to 30 days. And I think I notified Dean I'd like the ballots on the envelopes there for up to 60, but I don't know where we're at with the amendment on that. My question would be, if you have ballots being stored at the facility, but there's no video going, at any point, can those ballots be changed out or something happen? Because last time we had some keys come up and they went home. That's my concern.
So through the chair, Ms. Allard, what I am trying to tell you and what this amendment does is it provides for video until the election is complete, and the time period for the ability to file an election contest has run. So there is not anything, if anything, it's too late then, and after this date, for anything to happen anyway, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay, so I hear that. I was just concerned because if the ballots haven't been destroyed yet, then I would consider, and I'm blaming part of the community would too, that it's not over until it's over, meaning until those ballots and envelopes are destroyed. All right, I'll have to think about this one. Thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Madam Chair, for that leeway.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to support this because this is one of the items that I was concerned about as well, and I'm glad to see it actually going into code rather than it just being a sentence in the whereas or as being something that's preferred. But I think the live streaming is really critical, and in this day and age, there's no reason why we can't provide that. And I also wanted to say that this is very different from having security cameras in the facility. Security cameras are not accessible by the public, and you wouldn't want them to be. I mean, the point of having security cameras is to make sure that things are being secured and not being hacked into, and security cameras then don't get used for potentially nefarious purposes. But to have this available to the public, to be able to check in at any point and watch the process, or even when the process isn't going, for them to be able to make sure that something's not going, I think is going to go a long way toward improving and increasing public trust. So I think this is a very important thing to add into the code specifically, to say that the cameras, that they will be provided, I think is really important. So I'm happy to support this one because it does, like I said, it does answer one of my big concerns as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on LaFrance Amendment number 17.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
The amendment passes 11-0. Next, we have Weddleton Amendment number 18.
Thanks. I'd like to move Weddleton Amendment number 18.
Second. Moved by Mr. Weddleton, seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Weddleton?
Before I discuss it much, so this says section 14, which is now 15. Does that just get fixed when they all tie it all together?
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Whittleton, I think that means old section 14 is now 15.
Right. Okay. I don't know, do I need to amend the amendment to say that that's section 15? Or, because all the future amendments have that section number, their section numbers wrong.
Well, I'm not sure. Which one do you want to, where are you specifically at that you think it needs to be renumbered?
Well, it just says AO section 14, page 15, it's actually 15, and then when you go down to the actual text, it says section 14, but that should be 15 now because the previous amendment shoved everything up one.
I think Mr. Gates wrote this so we can double check with him, but...
Oh, we already took care of that?
Section 14 was... this ordinance becomes effective the date. That's your, enabling legislation. So that one is becoming 15, and this one is now 14.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I think this one addresses that kind of issue anyway. So basically this, we've had a lot of amendments, plus we've brought the Observer's Handbook sort of into code by reference. And this gives the clerk staff opportunity to go through the amended code, compare it with the Observer's Handbook, and make sure everything is lined up properly. And then they'll just, if there's any changes at all, then they'll come back with the AIM at our second meeting in January. Let us know what those were.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on Weddleton Amendment number 18.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
The amendment passes 11-0. Next, we have LaFrance Peterson Amendment number 19. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Move LaFrance Peterson Amendment number 19.
Second. Moved by Mr. Peterson, seconded by Ms. Zelatel. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a section that we are going to get some more detail about write-in candidates and how they can be qualified to have observers. And it also gets down to, in the event of a recount, the affected write-in candidate can register observers if they hadn't already had some registered. So this is just dealing with write-in candidates and their ability to have observers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Zelatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 copies of the amendment before me, one on white paper, one on blue paper. Are they the same?
Madam Chair, if may
Ms.
I weigh in?
Quinn-Davidson?
Yeah, I was just going to say I didn't propose any amendments, so my guess is, since my name is on one, that was a mistake and that it was reprinted with the correct names, but Travis can probably correct us if I'm wrong. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson, for pointing that out. Is there someone from the clerk's team who can address? Ms.
Through the
Jones?
chair, Ms. Quinn-Davidson, you are correct. The correct amendment was printed on blue paper by Mr. Gates.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Ms. Zelatel. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on LaFrance Peterson Amendment number 19.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
The amendment passes 11-0. Mr. Gates?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was just asking to speak to say I apologize for the drafting error in the name of the sponsor on that one, number 19. That was LaFrance and Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Seeing no other amendments, we are now back on the main motion. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask a general question of either Mr. Burke or Mr. Gates, and that was in regard to whether or not we need some kind of a provision for maintaining the live streaming recordings for some period of time. There was a little bit of back and forth before we had a chance to do any kind of amendments to that particular concept, but I just wondered if we might get a a comment from any of our attorneys in regard to whether or not we need to provide for some period of storage for live streaming recordings. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Would Mr. Gates or Mr. Burke address Ms. Kennedy's question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Chair
can hear
LaFrance?
you.
So Patrick Burke, for the record, through the chair. So that recommendation came from me, and I think I was more. I don't know that it's a legal requirement, Assemblymember Kennedy, so much as it's if we're going to record this, if we're going to live stream it, if we're going to have the video, there should be some parameters on what we do with the video, how long we store that video, so that way, if it ends up being destroyed or nobody can claim that it was, I wanted there to be some prescribed requirements for that video once it was created, but there's no legal reason to do that, more of a policy consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Ms. Kennedy, any follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And so I guess the question is then, is that something we should be addressing now, or is that something we should just kind of keep in the back of our heads and address through some other ordinance or resolution in the future? I guess I'm looking for a recommendation of whether or not to do anything with that now or try to figure out how to do something in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms.
Yeah,
Kennedy.
Patrick Burke, for the record, through the chair. I don't, Assemblymember Kennedy, that's I think that would be a policy decision or a decision for the for the legislative body. I would, just looking at it from a legal perspective and with the idea that maybe somebody might challenge us down the road, I do think it's important to have some sort of procedure for what we do with the video, how we store the video, and how long that video is stored.
Thank you, Ms.
Okay, but then we wouldn't have to necessarily do that tonight. We could come up with something in the next few months to actually deal with that rather than holding this over. So I think I'll see if I can't work with the attorneys on that and maybe come up with something to address it in the near future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, we've been, the Ethics and Elections Committee and the Clerk's Office and election staff and Mr. Gates and the legal team have been working on the update to Title 28 here for several months. We've had, it was on our agenda several times at the regular Ethics and Election Committee meeting. We also had a special meeting where we dealt with this. We've had special public hearings on this. And we just went through, it's over a couple of meetings, 19 amendments. And so we've been working on this for a significant amount of time. Many of the changes are in just improving the definitions of phrases or wording to make it more easily understood. And the section on the Observer's Handbook that we made additions and improvements to this time had not had additions or improvements made in the last several years. And so that's why there was more changes made to the handbook than the regular Title 28 code. But, a lot of this was brought on by the contentious election that was held this year. And so we felt we needed to make some changes to clarify the rules so that everyone knows what the requirements are. And I think it's important that campaigns and candidates get their observers signed on early so that they can get the training and the tour of the election center that they need to be able to do a good job as an observer. If you're going to do a good job for your campaign and observer, you need to actually have gone and had the tour of the election center and had the training. so you know what's going on and you know what to expect. And so I believe we've done an exhaustive amount of work on this, and I would appreciate all of your support on this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Kennedy?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the work that went into this particular document and all of these amendments and revisions, and I will say that I do not believe that this is an exhaustive improvement or revision to what we could be doing to this code, especially since we're still dealing with a relatively new animal called mail-in balloting or ballots or voting or however you want to characterize it. It really is a challenge to try to make sure that we provide something to the public that they can find very trustworthy. And it's not that anyone, I don't believe, is trying to intentionally provide something that isn't trustworthy, but this is just kind of the nature of what we're dealing with and how we're trying to figure out how to improve the challenges. I think we still have a myriad of issues that we should be dealing with in terms of mail-in balloting. However, they were not actually addressed in these revisions as thoroughly and as deeply as I think they could be. But what has been done in this particular group of revisions are helping to make the process a little bit better. So maybe we're taking baby steps at really trying to help reduce the number of challenges, to reduce the negative public scrutiny, hopefully making things more transparent and improving public trust. So I'm not at all excited about everything that is still in code that needs to be addressed and was not addressed, but I will be supporting this just because, like I said, I think the smaller steps that have been done are good ones. I still think there's a lot that could be done to improve the process and make it a lot more credible to the public at large. I think that's the thing that we have to keep in mind, is that there are people who just don't trust this system, and the more we can actually do to make them feel better about how everything works, the better. And that's what we should be doing. It's one thing to say, well, these bad things aren't happening, or these negative outcomes aren't happening. But it's another thing to actually be able to reassure the public that those things can't happen. So, since there's still a bit of pessimism out there that I think we can do a lot more to improve on. But for the changes that have been made in this were things that I know I wanted to see done, and so I will be supporting it. And hoping that we continue to listen to the public and get more feedback and basically try to figure out how to make the system that much more trustworthy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thanks. So I understand we're speaking on the main item here, right? Okay, good. Thanks. I will support this also and hope others will as well. This, drew a lot of attention, as it should. People should always be concerned about fair elections, and I think that's people most highly attuned to that are people who are in elective office, because we've experienced it at every level. And I think we are in kind of annual revisions of the election code. We're getting, that we had a good system, and every year we tweak it a little bit here and there and make it better. We've dealt here with many of the concerns people brought up. There was a fear that the number of observers was being decreased. It was never proposed that it would be, but we had an amendment that made it much clearer on, how many observers could be there and what a process would be. Were there any reason to change that? There's a lot of concern about being able to video the activities in the various voting locations, and we addressed that. We also addressed the live stream, which is fairly simple, really, and I think will make a huge difference in people's comfort with the system. And then the time for training and to register observers was brought back down to something that I believe is functionable for campaigns and will also, help the clerks. We also had an amendment that brought in, make sure that there's staff there to help observers and others to understand what's going on and get their questions answered very quickly. I'd like to thank the Elections Commission, which has a great role in bringing this forward every year as they look at how things went and how things could be improved. And also election workers who have contacted us, and also the observers. We heard here in public testimony at the meetings, but also through many emails, and I got a couple of phone calls from people who were observers and sharing their experiences, good and bad, and that was very helpful in this. So thanks everybody. I think this was a very long process, but it's critical. We should have trust in our elections, and I think we're there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to echo some of the comments made by Mr. Peterson and Mr. Weddleton, just by starting with a thank you to the clerk's office and the elections team, Ms. Jones, Ms. McConnell, Mr. Gates, the members of the Election Commission, and also to the members of the public. I think there's been a really excellent dialogue, and this was especially seen in a meeting with the observers that was held a couple weeks ago, where language was worked out as far as what would work, what was clear, and I thought that was just a really great way to work through this annual process. So thank you to the clerk's team for doing that. I also wanted to thank the election workers and to reiterate that the security and safety of the election workers is critical. It's so important, and that I will support and possibly bring forward additional appropriations to ensure adequate staffing, not just of election workers, but of security as needed as well. And the Vice Chair and I are working with Council on some revisions to Title 8, which is the Penal Code, where we intend to add language concerning video feed and intents to disrupt video feed, whether here in the chambers or at the election center, so that is addressed as well. And then finally, I just wanted to stress that, when Mr. Rudrick came forward and testified, he referred to this as the election improvement endeavor. And it has been an ongoing annual review. I think there have been 6 or 8 updates in the last 10 years or so. And when we look at all the public meetings, and I'll do a quick recap because I think it's important. Back in September 22nd, 29th, and then October 13, the Ethics and Elections Committee discussed the proposed changes, and that was after they were brought forward by the Elections Commission in conjunction with Council. The Election Commission had a public meeting on September 30. The ordinance was introduced on October 27th. The full assembly had a work session on December 3rd. The AO has been discussed at Federation and Community Council meetings and at community council meetings throughout the municipality. And then we held 2 public hearings on December 14th and on the 21st. And then, of course, there was the meeting with the observers as well. So I think that we have seen an improvement of the process, and again, I just thank everyone who has been involved, and that providing clarity and updating our elections code and providing for safety and security and transparency is critical. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance.
Mr. Constant?
Thank you. The public hearing was quite interesting, listening to how members of the public believe our election system is set up and how it's supposed to work. So I just wanted to briefly read 2 sections of the charter and 1 section of the code to make sure that it's in the record and that people who are listening understand where the power of an election is vested. So, in the charter, section 1102, Part A, election procedures, it states, all municipal elections shall be nonpartisan. The Assembly, by ordinance, shall establish procedures for regular and special municipal elections, including provisions for absentee voting. In case of ties, the Assembly shall determine the successful candidate by lot. The germane piece there is that the Assembly establishes election procedures for the municipality. Then, in Section 405 of the Charter, it states, the clerk, the Assembly shall appoint a municipal clerk and prescribe the duties of that office. The clerk serves at the pleasure of the Assembly. Finally, Title 28, the Code, power and duties of the municipal clerk, delegated by ordinance from this Assembly. A, the municipal clerk shall prepare for, conduct, and supervise all municipal elections, period, or comma, and then and shall determine whether candidates are qualified. So, I read these things because I've heard a lot of testimony and we saw a lot of emails about people stating we are putting power into the hands of an unelected individual, bureaucrat, etc. And I wanted to just be very clear with my comments that the Charter vests with the Assembly the authority to operate and conduct the elections of the municipality of Anchorage. By ordinance, the Assembly has delegated that authority to the clerk. So when the clerk is acting on behalf of elections policy, she is doing so on behalf of the Assembly. So the public has the opportunity to address members of the Assembly. The public has the opportunity to bring ballot proposals that they would like to see, initiatives to change this code if they don't see what they want to see in it. But at this time, as far as I am concerned, we, the Assembly, and that's at least a majority of 6, have established this code. And this code is good. And we've worked really hard to get to where we are now. There's a regular process every year. We do this work. Effectively, the clerk is our chief elections officer. And it is a time to approve these changes so that the rules of the next election can be set. I urge your support.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to echo a lot of what Mr. Constant just stated. And, one of the things that I heard a lot during the testimony was folks wanted to know why now? Why are we doing this? And, folks were making, in my opinion, incorrect assumptions about why this particular ordinance was coming before us. And, I did a little bit of research. If you look between 1980 and 2020, there are between 20 and 25 different ordinances that made updates to our elections code. It is a regular process that has been happening for decades in this city. So I really appreciate all of the work that has gone into this, and I absolutely trust our municipal clerk, our wonderful, hardworking municipal clerk, to run our elections, and I look forward to any future updates to our code that we need to make. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2021-110S.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
Item 5A passes 10-1. We now have before us item 6A, emergency ordinance number EO 2021-8, an emergency ordinance providing financial resources for labor, supplies, and other expenditures required to address municipal response to coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19, appropriating an amount not to exceed $5 million as a contribution from the area-wide general capital improvement project SIP fund 401-800, previously appropriated for property acquisition by AO 2020-99, as amended and now reappropriated to the COVID-19 fund, and providing a plan for future reimbursement of said reappropriation, Office of Management and Budget. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Zalatel, seconded by Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Zalatel Amendment Number 1.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Zalatel and seconded by, was that you, Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Seconded by Mr. Constant. Go ahead, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment, like amendments before it, to a request to use the SIP or CIP fund to fund the COVID-19 response, puts the fund source actually as an inter-fund loan from the Area General Fund 101 fund. This has been the practice of this body, and there's really no reason to deviate from that practice right now. Additionally, the $5 million remaining in the SIP fund has been part of extensive conversations in the facilitated process as we move through the exit strategy for mass care. As has been approved to date, out of those funds, $6 million of the $11 million total, it still comes up short to get us out of mass care. And as we can see from this particular appropriation request, if we keep funding mass care and not a way out of it, we'll keep funding something, but not the solution. So I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to ask the administration, since Ms. Domboski seems to be the only one here tonight, if she can explain why the administration would or would not support the inter-fund loan versus the contribution.
Ms. Domboski?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Allard, I just want to point out that we have a number of members of the administration on the phone, and the CFO is online. I believe that'd be an appropriate question for CFO Frisk to answer. Mr.
Thank
Frisk?
you.
Through the chair, I apologize, Ms. Allard. Could you please repeat your question? The phone blipped on me when you were speaking.
Thank you. So the amendment for Mrs. Zalatel brought forward says that she would like to strike it as a contribution and move it from an inter-fund loan. Could you explain why we would or would not want to do it this way so the public understands, please?
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Allard, if we keep, again, I'm back to the same drum that I beat several times already, is that we cannot continue down the path of utilizing interfund loans that is detrimental to our financial picture, and it's got to stop. And so that's the position. We do not want to proceed in that manner, but understand that that the Assembly has the ability to do it this way.
Thank you. Madam Chair, can I make a comment? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fisk. I appreciate it. I'm not going to support the amendment because I did hear that it has been practiced that this body do it this way, and this body has got our city into a massive amount of debt. So I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Next is Mr. Dunbar, and then Ms. Kennedy, then Mr. Constant, then Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Weddleton's actually in the queue, and I was going to ask him or Mr. Constant to maybe comment on what Ms. Zalatel said. I don't want to ask her directly. I know her sort of status with the facilitated process has changed. But I am very curious about that. And, you know, we took $6 million and we did two things I think will be incredibly useful. And then we gave the administration $2.7 million to maybe do an RFP and maybe buy a tent. But it's clearly not enough to go forward with that project. We couldn't even get an answer to what exactly they're going to purchase with it. We might end up with a tent with nowhere to put it. And so I am concerned about these funds being used for that purpose in the future. I mean, this body and the administration rejected a series of, I think, very reasonable amendments that would have limited the size of that facility to something the neighborhood was much more comfortable with. And so again, I'm sort of worried now about what these $5 million are going to be directed towards. If the facilitated process is about housing, then I think that's very admirable. If it's about 340-bed facility, that's something I can't support. So I guess I'd like to hear what the $5 million is being discussed for in the facilitative process, if you're comfortable sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, thanks. We do have an RFP that is out to ask generally for people to say, hey, what could you build that would accommodate 200 people and have the capacity for up to 130 for surge for a low barrier navigation center? And at some point, we'll get an answer in mid-January, and if the bids are something that makes sense, kind of on a, then we'll likely move forward with something. So we don't know exactly what yet, because we don't want to constrain it too tightly on what that would be. It could be a fabric structure, not a tent certainly, or it could be built out of masonry or stick built. We don't know yet. We just open the door. We need something for this. There was some really good news on that as far as the cost goes. I think it started out originally as something on the order of 80,000 square feet for 1,000 something people plus navigation services. And then that was brought down in our discussions to, something half that size, possibly 40,000. And before, when the RFP went out, architect looked through and saw what kind of space needs there are, looking at 200 people. With the capacity to handle a surge, and that surge wouldn't necessarily be more square footage than you'd want for 200, but it would be to meet building codes were more people added, so you'd have more doors and ventilation and so on, sort of prepare for that. And that estimate came down to 24,000 square feet. So if there is a fear that there's going to be something massive built somewhere, I think you see really good faith that no, we've got people going, we're looking at something that is not excessive. It is really the 200. Generally thinking ongoing, something that would serve 200 people. But those are expensive. And will we have the money? So the money that we've allocated at this point could possibly go towards design ultimately and not really get much built. So we'll need more. The $5 million would go a long way because, as you've seen with the other parts of this exit strategy, which is all encompassing, it is being matched by philanthropy and by businesses and so on. So with the continuing match that we hope to get from other organizations, the $5 million would go a long ways toward getting us, that component of the exit strategy.
Can I just... So I want to say that what Ms. Zolotel writes here about the interfund loan, I think is absolutely true. And I think we all agree that this is a good use of these funds wherever they come from tonight. But unfortunately, I can't support this amendment because partly what Mr. Weddleton just said, I think, confirms what I think this money is actually going to be used for if we leave it in this account, which is, you say it'll surge to 340. Look at any facility in Anchorage right now that's dedicated to a purpose like that, like Brother Francis. It was serving, before COVID, way more people than it was intended to. If you build a 340, it's going to be a 340-bed facility. But I do agree that it's going to be stripped down. It's not going to have a lot of the bells and whistles that were promised in the summer. It'll be a 340-bed facility for single adults, and it'll be the largest homeless facility in the history of the city. And so I do not trust, I guess I don't trust this money in this account anymore, unfortunately, because of all the amendments that were rejected the last time we debated this. But if it passes, I think that's also perfectly acceptable, because I sort of, for better or worse, I reject a lot of the analysis the CFO has presented to us in terms of our ability to get reimbursed from FEMA. I think we will. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And actually, Mr. Constant, as part of the facilitated process team, wanted to address your question as well. So, Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. I find it interesting that we immediately went down the road of we're going to build a 340-bed facility. That is not what these funds are intended for. These funds are intended for any number of capital improvement projects. These are building funds. These are not operating funds. And so I want it to be really clear for people to understand there are several other elements within the context of what we're working on that are still underfunded. We are still working to find the capital stack that gets a number of other facilities on the table and operating. And so I think it's an unwise endeavor to spend our capital dollars for operating expenses. So I just want to bring it back from the edge of where Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Dunbar took it and say, no, that's way too specific for what this pool of funds are for. These are for all of the capital stack beds in hotels, beds in non-congregate facilities, beds across the municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Before we move on through the queue, I will turn to Ms. Zalatel for a motion to extend.
Yes, Madam Chair. Move to extend to 6:15.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Zalatil, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Any opposition? Seeing none, we are extended until 6:15. I'll continue through the queue, next with Ms. Kennedy, then Mr. Constant, then Mr. Weddleton, then Ms. Zalatil. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the past, I have stated my concerns about using imaginary funds from what we call the interfund loan account. So I'm not going to be supporting this, but one of the questions that I have is in regard to how much FEMA reimbursement we have gotten up to date. We haven't had an update, I'd say, in the last month, so I just wondered if the administration had received any other additional funds since the last time, since the last time we've had that number updated. I'd be interested to know if we've received any additional FEMA reimbursement funds at this point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Demboski or Mr. Frisk, would you like to address Ms. Kennedy's question concerning FEMA funds?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just searching my emails here really quick to get the right number. But yes, we have received additional funds. I'm just looking. Mr. Frisk, do you remember that amount that we received last week?
I don't have the exact number, but I can give you a fairly close representation, and it does have a large amount of COVID-related money in it, as well as some earthquake. But give me just 30 seconds here. I believe the number was close to $6 million. Let me... So real quick, we received roughly a little over $500,000 for earthquake projects that were specific to the Eagle River Public Works section, and then north of $5 million for the reimbursement of COVID. So at this, I can't give you an exact number. I can't find it right now, but I'd say 5.5 million is a good, fair representation.
Thank you, Mr. Frisk. Any follow-up, Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, that's helpful to have the additional money, but I think considering that we're still well over $100 million basically in debt, that $6 million is nice, but it leaves a huge gap in terms of the fact that we're spending way more money than we're getting back in certainly in a timely fashion. So I think this just puts us in a more dangerous position, much like the information that we got from the bond councils, from the bond rating corporations, and why we have a negative outlook to our name right now. So I can't support this. I believe this just puts us further over the edge on that threshold of financial malfeasance that the Assembly itself will be actually responsible for, and I have no intention of contributing to that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Constant?
First a question and then a comment. And Ms. Kennedy asked the question almost exactly as I would have asked to the administration, but I would ask a second question that is the complement to it. What's the status of our reimbursement requests? Because we also had some issues related to not actually getting the request in flow. And so are we having a complementary parallel positive effort, and are we being successful in getting the requests in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll take that question. Yes, our team is actively working the FEMA reimbursements. As you know, there may be multiple data points in order to submit reimbursements. Sometimes we submit them and FEMA asks for additional information. That is a process that is ongoing. It is ongoing in a robust fashion. And I did just find the specific number that we were just asked about, Madam Chair. Last week, I was advised by the director of OEM that we received an additional $5,316,010 of COVID-19 reimbursements, which will end 2021 with a total of $36,501,622.50. That's what the 2021 reimbursements have been achieved as of this was sent to me on Tuesday, December 21st.
Could you please repeat that aggregate number one more time?
Sure, you want the total?
Just the aggregate.
The total was $36,501,622.50.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So then the comment that I would follow on with that is, somebody just asserted that there's been malfeasance. I think that the record rebuts that. The administration effectively clawing back $36,501,620.50 is demonstrating a very successful effort at capturing back funds. And in fact, if you just look at the simple math, if we did appropriate out of the interloan fund, we would in fact not change the status quo at all, because just this week the reimbursement was $5,316,000, and we are looking at a far outlier reach of $5 million, and so that means the net position doesn't change at all. And so that's status quo. That's not deeper into any hole. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'd like to address this point again. And I agree that there is no malfeasance here whatsoever. It's kind of not even close. And in fact, we are spending cash that we have because as a city for decades, apparently our history, we've been very frugal about saving so that we would have money when we needed it. And that's a real tribute to Anchorage. So what we have is less cash, but we have increasing accounts receivables from FEMA. That on your books, and if there's an accountant out there somewhere, you can correct me, but you decrease cash, you increase accounts receivable, I believe are reliable. We're not in debt. It just changes the nature of how these things, the assets are held. Are these imaginary funds? These are not imaginary funds, or we wouldn't be able to use them to buy stuff. And where are these? Now, we got at our previous meeting, I think just a week ago, a report from our money managers on the municipal cash pool, which is, many sources of funds. It has school district money and things that we can't spend, but this is where we're getting our interlibrary loan. And it tells me here that on September 30th, the market value was $591 million, up from $542 million on June 30th. Now, this is a time when we're getting a lot of property tax payments in, so it should be at its peak. But this is how it goes. This is actually fairly typical for September to have that amount of money in there. It's not like we're drained down and we don't have anything to work with. We are in pretty good shape, actually, despite the huge amount of money for COVID and still from the earthquake. So, the claims that we've wrecked the city and created debt is simply not mathematically there and not realistically. I mean, we just got this report. So this reflects September dollars in the cash pool. So I do support this amendment. We need the flexibility of the other funds. And if we don't have those funds, then we have trouble because we are committed, and as a goal of this assembly, a goal of the mayor to deal with homelessness, and the funds from the CARES Act that was proposed by the administration to use, we need those to move forward with the homelessness. And if there's anyone in the city who doesn't see that as a huge issue, you probably stand alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to address the concern that the $5 million is somehow already dedicated to some piece of the exit strategy. I disagree with that characterization. When we passed the exit strategy, it had 5 prongs, and some of those prongs are not yet moving. One is special populations, that's couples, LGBTQIA plus populations, as well as women. And to date, we've moved forward 120 potential beds for medical convalescents, 93 housing units, whether permanent supportive housing or workforce. That's it so far. There are 831 occupants in mass care today, with a time ticking of 6 months from today that we are hearing that mass care will close. So I think that having the $5 million in the CIP fund will allow us to leverage the opportunity to try to house these folks. I think housing is the only solution to homelessness. We are well below our 300 target of PSH, or permanent supportive housing and workforce housing, we put forward as part of the exit strategy. And without funding to leverage against private investment, we won't get there. And we will be moving folks from shelter to shelter, which would be the most unfortunate set of circumstances. Of course, some folks will move to shelter, but to the extent that we can leverage this $5 million against private investment, as well as the housing resources we have, there is so much money in housing right now. We have rental assistance, we have housing stability funds, we have vouchers. We cannot get people housed right in this moment because there are not units. This $5 million can go towards identifying and bringing forward and putting online more units to get people housed. Anchorage is in a housing crisis, and if we don't keep this money to solve that housing crisis, we're just going to be spinning our wheels. And when it comes down to it, you look for operating dollars for these projects. Housing dollars are there. Operating dollars for shelter are what exist in the alcohol tax at about $3.5 million and a little bit of HUD funding. So the better bet and the better spend is on housing, and I think we can really do some amazing things if we keep this $5 million available for leverage to move more housing projects forward, and we're really going to need to in the next 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on Zalatel Amendment Number 1.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
The amendment passes 8-3. We now have the main motion before us to approve EO 2021-8. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve EO 2021-8.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
Item 6A passes 9-2.
Madam Chair.
Who was that? Ms. Domboski?
Thank you. You're going to hear me do this a lot, but can we have a vote of immediate reconsideration, and the administration urges a no vote?
Move to
So moved.
Second.
A motion for immediate reconsideration of EO 2021-8 has been made by Mr. Constant and seconded by Mr. Peterson with a no vote urged. Is there any discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion for immediate reconsideration of EO 2021-8.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Ms. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Constant?
No.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
No.
The motion for immediate reconsideration of EO 2021-8 fails 0-11. We are now back to the consent agenda minus the pulled items, and then we will take up item 4B13 after the consent agenda. We have 6 minutes left, so I expect we'll just see how far we get. Could I get a motion, Madam Vice Chair, to approve the consent agenda minus the pulled items? So move.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Zalatel, seconded by Mr. Peterson, seeking unanimous consent. Seeing no opposition, the consent agenda minus the pulled items has been approved.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Zimboski?
the administration urges immediate reconsideration on all items on the consent agenda and urges a no vote.
Thank you, Ms.
So
Zimboski.
moved.
Second. A motion for immediate reconsideration of all items on the consent agenda minus 4B13? Yes, that's correct, Madam Chair. Has been made by Mr. Constant and seconded by Ms. Zalatel, seeking unanimous consent. Actually, sorry, no. A no vote has been urged. Members may proceed to vote on the motion for immediate reconsideration of the consent agenda minus item 4B13.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Ms. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Constant?
No.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
No.
The motion for immediate reconsideration of the consent agenda minus item 4B13 fails 0-11. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to extend the meeting until we finish item 4, Bravo 13.
Second.
Mr. Gates?
Yes, thank you. I was asked to speak because I believe it's sort of my duty to advise you to extend to accommodate audience participation in today's meeting. Our charter requires a reasonable opportunity for the public to be heard at each regular and special meeting. And we didn't even have any public hearing items tonight. So I think that would be advisable.
Thank you. Madam Chair, based on the advice of Mr. Gates, I move to extend the meeting to 6:30.
Second.
A motion is on the floor to extend the meeting until 6:30. It's been made by Ms. Zalatel, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Is there any opposition? Seeing none, the meeting is extended until 6:30. So we are now back to item 4B13, and we have 2 amendments. Mr. Weddleton?
Move to approve, or was it already, did we already open this one up? We did not, no, move to approve. Did we have a motion?
A motion to approve is on the floor. It was made by Ms. Zalatel
I'd like to
and seconded by Mr. Peterson.
All right, thanks. Okay, I'd like to move Weddleton Amendment 1A.
Second. Moved by Mr. Weddleton, seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Weddleton?
All right, thanks. So this increases the dollar amount to reflect an opportunity. The original document provides funding for 20 beds at Sockeye Inn for the next 3 and possibly 6 months. At this point, knowing that there's a pending sale, the owner of the hotel has stopped taking in new people. So that has opened up, at this point, 30 new room for 30 people. So this increases the funding for the next 3, and then with possible additions, 6 months. And this, I did show it to the city manager and to Mr. Frisk, and he recommended one change, but he does say that it is fund certified for this amount.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
Can I make my amendment to this now? Okay, I'd like to just offer a small amendment, and that's if you flip to the second page, really the last paragraph in the last line. It says a new PO value will be $330,000. I move to change that to $359,700.
Mr.
Second.
Weddleton, would you repeat the amount again?
Change 330,000 to 359,700.
359,700.
Correct.
And the amendment to the amendment, which was moved by Mr. Weddleton, was seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Weddleton?
Okay, and that was recommended by the CFO.
Ms. Zalatel, did you want to speak to the amendment on the amendment? Seeing no one in the queue on the amendment to the amendment. Do you have it? Seeing no members in the queue on the amendment to the amendment, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment to change the PO value from $330,000 to $359,700. And that's on page 2 in that last paragraph.
Mr. Rivera?
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
The amendment to the amendment passes 11-0. We are now back on the main amendment, number 1A. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Mr. Weddleton bringing this forward. I think it's important that we have these rooms online, particularly so we can continue to decompress the Sullivan Arena by freeing up space within the system. What a lot of folks don't realize is that the Sullivan Arena on the dashboard has increased its typical census to 510 individuals from 400, and that was to accommodate the demand. So more capacity in the system right now, particularly capacity that is going to become long-term and operationalized within our community, I think is really important, and that we shouldn't wait and pass up this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 1A.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
Amendment 1A passes 11-0.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Dombrowski?
once again, the administration requests immediate reconsideration and urges a no vote.
Let's wait on the main item.
And Ms. Dombrowski, I believe we can come back to the motion to reconsider once we vote on the main motion. Great, thanks. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh.
Do you have another amendment?
No, the other one was a replacement. I had 2 options, so we're done with this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. So amendment number 1B was replaced by amendment number 1A.
That's correct, and that was recommendation of the CFO.
Thank you. So we are now back on the main motion to approve AM 846-2021 as amended. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
Item 4B13 passes 11-0. And per Ms. Demboski's request,
I move for immediate reconsideration, urging no
Second.
vote.
Sorry.
Second.
a motion for immediate reconsideration of item 4B13 has been made by Mr. Dunbar and seconded by Ms. Quinn Davidson with a no vote urged. Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to reconsider AM 846-2021 as amended.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Ms. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Constant?
No.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
No.
The motion for immediate reconsideration of 4B13 fails 0-11. That concludes the consent agenda. We are now on audience participation. For audience participation, please direct your comments to the assembly or the chair. You have 3 minutes to speak, and personal attacks are not appropriate. In addition, audience members are asked to avoid clapping or other disruptions during audience participation. And finally, during audience participation, assembly members generally do not answer questions or respond to comments. We may talk to you offline during a break or after the meeting to address any questions you have. So please come forward, state your name for the record, your community council, or the area of the municipality in which you live. Thank you.
Irene Queednow, District 3, represented by Eagle River. I have a couple comments. When I testified on the election ordinance, I was reprimanded that I was off topic because I referenced the election in 2016, and actually I was not the only one that referenced a different election. Ms. Silver also referenced, I believe, the 2020 election, and then consequently was also reprimanded for being off topic. When we're talking about election and election law, to not be able to talk about elections to make a point, that is not being off topic. That is being censored. And both Ms. Silver and I should have been able to talk about any election to make a point when it comes about to talk about election law. The next thing, if this trend that the Assembly here has been doing, if that continues, the next thing will be, if we don't say we agree with the ordinance, we will be off topic. And like I said before, that's censoring, that's not maintaining the topic. Secondly, there were some comments in terms of that the clerk is not elected and that the public doesn't trust the clerk. And the reason for that is because, yes, we know that the Assembly appoints the clerk, but the 9 extreme left Assembly members, we don't trust you. You have hijacked the public for months and months and months on end now. So consequently, we don't trust the clerk because you can assign, you are not nonpartisan. So your assignment of the clerk is not necessarily nonpartisan, and that's why we don't trust you and the clerk, not because we don't understand that the Assembly has the power to appoint the clerk. So those are the points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you for your participation. Welcome. Please state your name for the record, your community council, or the area of the community in which you live. Could you turn on the microphone, please?
Here it's covered.
Thank you.
Kevin Cross, Chuyak, Eagle River. And what I'm here to speak about is actually more for Zalatel, Quinn Davidson, and Perez-Verdia. I am chair of the plating board, just so you know. I'm also owner of Quantum Laundry, which sits right on the edge between there. I also own several apartment buildings in Zolotels, and I will tell you that what's happening in Midtown, you guys aren't doing any help, okay? This is a problem created by government, and then government threw gas on it. At 604 West Arctic Boulevard, there was a 70-room privately owned transitional housing that was contracted through the Department of Corrections. The property had a fire sprinkler system that went off. It suffered water damage. They couldn't get the fire sprinkler system right back online. This is 2017 roughly. Under the previous administration, they were very aggressive and not business friendly. They went in and shut that place down, and overnight they kicked out over about 200 homeless people onto the street. Those people flooded, then COVID hit, they had nowhere to go. Why? Because government said if you didn't have a fire sprinkler system, you couldn't house anybody, not even partially. You flooded the street with homeless people, and now we're spending taxpayer money to solve a problem in part that was created by government. Do you see, and then we watched them flood onto the streets. We put them into the Sullivan Arena in order to try to solve a problem because we're wondering where they all came from. Well, that's where it came from. It came from because you had a private business that was shut down. They forced them out in the dead of night, literally boarded the place. Muni literally went out under building safety and boarded the place up. Why? Because the homeless people were trying to break back into that building because it was the only place they knew of to go to get out of the cold and the rain. So then the place became deteriorated because of government. Government comes in and spends money trying to solve the issue. Now you guys are throwing money at the Sockeye Inn. Have any of you walked around since you started leasing properties from the Sockeye as well as the other buildings? Have you been and have you walked the neighborhoods? It has deteriorated so badly I can't even tell you. I spoke last time and told you we literally have people, there's human feces on the side of our building because they just walk up to the building, drop their pants, go to the bathroom on our building and our property. I don't see you out there with latex gloves helping us clean it up. I don't see you going out 2 or 3 times a day helping us clean the dumpsters. It is horrible what government has created and then now tries to solve with more government. Housing without aggressive treatment is pointless. We're just shuffling them, but they're not getting treatment and they need treatment. You're right that if you just go some other place, you're going to go somewhere else. But your neighborhoods and business is deteriorating. And I'm watching it happen not over months or years. It is happening aggressively week after week as you expand these beds because they're not patrolling them. If we call the cops, they don't show up for 3 to 4 hours. Have you ever had to carry a gun into your own business because a violent, mentally unstable homeless person might come in and then lock themselves in your bathroom?
Thank you for your participation.
Thanks.
Before we go on, and we just have time for one.
Sorry, Mr. Cross? Yes, sir. Sorry. I was slow on poking my screen here. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
All right, thanks. I'm sorry, so I didn't catch which building you said had the sprinkler issue.
It was 604 West Fireweed Lane. It was known as the Anchorage Midtown Hotel. It was privately owned. It didn't make a bunch of money, and it wasn't the most fantastic, but they received private contracts through the Department of Corrections in order to house people, usually for anywhere from $25 a night to $99 to, for a week or whatever. It was double occupancy. I knew the owners because I'm also in commercial real estate. I'm a commercial real estate broker. When they kicked everybody out, the place immediately lost money because when you lose 100% of your occupancies and you're not wildly profitable, it's real hard to make your mortgage payment. Yeah. So then the property was taken back by FNBA. FNBA worked aggressively with the courts in order to try it, but the municipality would not let them work. This was before PPE funds, so even trying to get loans, and they weren't able to get an insurance claim in time before FNBA foreclosed on the property and took it back. Now it is a 70-unit vacant building in Midtown that was designed for assisted living with multiple shared bathrooms that sits vacant. And instead of spending $3.2 million to fix a building that could be used, we're buying new buildings and building new stuff and spending money in fancy hotels. As a 30-year-old, as a 30-year Midtown business owner in Anchorage, I'm just amazed that you guys don't know this, like that nobody wanders the streets and talks to business owners. I just see you guys spend and write checks willy-nilly, and I'm like, have you not talked to any of the people who live around these businesses and the things that you're doing? It's like, have we become so disassociated we don't know what's going on in our own communities? Did you not know that there was a 70-unit privately owned building that got foreclosed on for a broken fire system they couldn't find parts for? Yeah, well, building safety knew. Building safety was not friendly. They went out there with drills and boarded the place up so homeless people wouldn't crawl in.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation. We have 1 minute left, and I had missed Ms. Demboski earlier in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the administration, we'd just like to say a sincere thank you to the Assembly for holding this special meeting to be able to deal with some very time-sensitive issues that are going to be serving the most vulnerable portions of our population in many regards. So thank you very much, and Happy New Year to each of you.
Thank you, Ms. Demboski. Happy New Year. And ma'am, if you want to go ahead and start your testimony, you can finish it, but I know that the feed may, or the recording may stop. So welcome.
Thank you. It seems like I'm always getting cut off, and that's why I'm here. I was hoping that I could give my comments before you guys voted, because I was cut off when I was last trying to give my testimony. But there's some important things that I think that it's outrageous that you guys have failed to consider. If we're going to use the state voter rolls to the municipality elections, then we should follow all the state policy and procedures. We need to do a huge data cleanup on our voter rolls like they do in other states. We need to be checking more than 10 signatures. We need to be checking court
Madam
records
Chair, I
and
have a point of
MLS
order.
records to verify registered voters.
Ma'am, would you hold, please? Ms. Allard?
Madam Chair, there are a few people here. It's the end of the night. I'm wondering if we can extend to listen to the 25 minutes for the final
We have
testimony.
actually missed the window for any further motions because it is 6:30 and we automatically adjourn.
Oh, did we? Oh, okay. Thanks, Madam Chair.
But we can, and would you please state your name, ma'am? You did not.
Sherry in South, you guys all know me. We have a list of foreigners that live here that are applying for the PFD, and they are automatically put on our voter rolls. I think it's fascinating that we have on our voter rolls 630,000 people, and we only have 475,000 registered voters that are eligible and actually citizens of this country. And I would just wonder why you guys aren't curious about 125,000 plus ballots that are being sent out. There does not need to be, I mean, it's just so frustrating, all the things that have gone on. We don't need, in that amendment you guys just passed, police authority. This is not Nazi Germany. I don't think the police have to come in for poll observers. I don't think Mr. Constant seems to be a little confused about the power thing. When you have a city clerk that is appointed by this body and she can change the rules midstream of whatever's going on, it needs to be clearly defined, specifically outlined before people can randomly change the rules. We're so tired of you guys flipping and flopping and changing the rules. And I've given you all a copy of what my comments are. I just wanted it on the record that I'm amazed at how not curious you guys are. Another thing I would like to remind you of, you just passed this other thing to spend another $5 million. Don't you guys pay attention? The government is broke. They're looking at a shutdown. Where do you think this? It is imaginary funds. There's no money coming. Otherwise, they would have reimbursed us. Please stop spending money irresponsibly. Go walk the streets of this city and pay attention to what you're supposed to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you for your participation. We are adjourned.